off by meeting the self-professed happiest med student in the whole world, Lully. She tells us that her life right now is going great, better than great even. Ever since she was a little girl, she's dreamed of being a doctor. And even though people said that she couldn't do it, she proved them all wrong because starting tomorrow, med school's over and the next phase is set to begin. On top of this, she's lucky enough to be dating a super hunk, Diego. He's a med student too. But unlike Lully, Diego's having second thoughts about his future. Call it a conscience of character. He tries to voice these concerns to his caring girlfriend only to learn that she isn't so caring. He tells her that he's thinking of quitting med school altogether, that he might not even want to be a doctor anymore. But Lully doesn't believe him. In fact, she doesn't even want to hear it. Diego's trying to be serious with her, but all Lully seems to care about is herself, a running theme at the start of the movie. The lovebirds are out partying with some other med students. But once they take a break from all the dancing, Diego again tries to tell Lully about, quitting med school. And again, she's ignoring him, or tries to change the subject, or ponders on what food she's going to order. The point here being is that in Lully's world, the only thing that seems to matter is how Lully's doing. That's until she sees Diego flirting with another woman, Paula. Their residency doctor and teacher. At least this is enough to get Lully's attention. In a moment of anger, she accuses him of liking Paula, and then decides to go all in and tell him that he may as well quit being a doctor too. And it looks like Lully's kicked out of the Girlfriend of the Year ceremony too, because Diego's not having any of it, and responds by calling Lully out for being selfish. She disagrees, but then Diego's point is proven when he bites into some of that food that Lully ordered for him, only to find out that it has prawns in it, something that he's allergic to. They call an ambulance, and he's ultimately fine. But then Lully's like, hey, why did you never tell me you were allergic to prawns? And he goes, I did. Lully promptly tries to change the subject. Their 1-year anniversary's coming up, and she has a great idea for what they can do. But Diego stops her. He's had enough. He tells her that this was the final straw in their relationship, and now, once and for all, they're done. So it's early the next morning, and Lully's woken up by her mother, who's rushing her to get ready for her first day as a doctor's resident. And indeed, the next few moments is Lully rushing through the house in a bid to get ready on time. Here we get another taste of Lully being self-involved, only really caring about herself. Even when she leaves the house, spots her best friend Julio pushing his broken car down the road, she rushes on past, unable to stop and help him out. Flashback time, just of a young Lully, telling her teacher of how much she always wanted to be a doctor. Even the little girl sitting behind her bullying her about not having a father can't tear her down. In fact, we get the sense that it's her dead father that's pushing Lully to become a doctor, just to make him proud. Lully's at work now, her first day of being a real doctor, and already things are kinda awkward. Diego's there, and right away she sees him flirting with the hot residency Dr. Paula. Lully asks him why he bothered turning up. Wasn't he gonna quit? And he tells her that he changed his mind. From there, we pivot into the theme of this movie, listening. Paula tells the group that they can never be good surgeons if they don't listen to their patients, something that we all know Lully is bound to struggle with. And sure enough, their very first patient of the day, and Lully screws it up by not listening and trying to do everything herself. Paula catches her right away and makes sure to scold her right in front of the group, which leaves Lully feeling appropriately chastised. But a moment of redemption soon presents itself in our B-plot. You see, the B-plot for the film is a patient called Oscar. He's laid up in bed right now, looking pretty damn sick. A quick diagnosis confirms that it was most likely a stroke that affected the cerebellum. But they'll have to put him through an MRI later to confirm. And guess who's put in charge of doing the MRI? The dream team, Lully and Diego. I guess Paula doesn't know that they broke up. Later that day, the two are setting up Oscar to get into the MRI. He's wishing that his son was there, but he and his son don't really talk anymore, so he knows it's not going to happen. But I guess he knew to mention it now for the audience because Oscar clearly has a keen sense of foreshadowing. Lucky then that Lully probably wasn't listening. She's far too busy making a point of ignoring Diego. The two keep bickering like children, but are soon interrupted when the medical equipment and lights and monitors all start flashing and malfunctioning. The The technician tells him to wait as he goes for help, but typical Lully doesn't listen. She sees Oscar moving in the MRI machine and charges in to help him. Diego runs in after her, but the moment they're at the machine, there's a huge surge of power. An explosion, and the two doctors are blasted backwards. It's good news though. Lully wakes up a little while later in a med bay, and from the looks of things, she's perfectly fine. And for once, Lully doesn't care about herself. She wants to know how Diego is. That is until she sees that Diego is being looked after by Paula. Now, despite the very real fact that Paula is a doctor and is just doing her job, Lully wants to use that to confirm her suspicion that the two are having an affair. But that's the least of Lully's problems. Her best friend Vanessa is there with her. And it might just be Lully's imagination, but for some reason, she seems to be able to hear what Vanessa's thinking, especially when it comes to Diego and Paula. It's around this point that Lully freaks out. She rushes from the hospital in a panic, but on the way out, she manages to read just about every single mind that she passes. It's here that we start to understand the rules of this new mind-reading power that Lully's developed. She's been touching the person in order to hear what they're thinking. This culminates on the bus, where she falls into every single person and catches a snippet of their thoughts. Needless to say, the stress is starting to get to her. Needing to escape for a while, Lully visits her best friend Julio at a volleyball practice, and he's looking to be a pretty good volleyball player. Seriously, after practice, the coach tells him that it's time to put him in for the big game next week. But Julio immediately panics, even claiming that he has a leg injury so that he can't play. But the coach shuts him down, telling him that he's playing, much to Julio's disappointment. Now after the game, Julio sits with Lully and she takes a look at this supposed injury of his. Of course, she reads his mind and learns that he's not actually injured and he's just saying it to get out of playing. Fear's holding him back. She calls him out on it, but is soon breaking down in tears over her own tragic situation. Classic Lully. So they get back to Lully's house, where her mother's all over her about today's accident. A quick hug and a mind read reveals that her mother is really just worried about Lully's relationship, fearing that she'll be alone forever because she's so cold and pushes people away. So naturally, Lully pushes her away, hating that she can read minds now. Back in her room, she wonders why she and Julio aren't dating anymore. Julio tries to tell her that it's just because they aren't right for one another. But a moment of hand-holding, with Lully's signature mind-reading powers, Julio accidentally reveals that he's gay. She calls him out, he gets angry, and then she shows him her new power. Lully swears Julio to secrecy. But this lasts all of 10 seconds. Vanessa soon comes barging in, and when she demands to know what's going on, Julio says straight up she can read minds. And then Lully reveals that he's gay. They argue a bit for a few seconds before fleeing the house somewhere more isolated to talk. Alone now, the three friends can't believe this is happening. For some reason, Vanessa seems more interested in Julio's homosexuality than Lully's mind-reading power, but Julio doesn't want to talk about it. Instead, he wants to know what they're gonna do about Lully's new ability. Well, Lully too. She doesn't want this power, but lucky Vanessa's there to talk some sense into him. And she reveals that this power is a good thing, because now Lully can use it to find out how Diego really feels about her, and if he and Paula are having an affair. Slightly morally gray, Vanessa, but still a good plan. The next day, and the two girls are tracking down Diego. They see him with his father speaking to Paula, which only heightens Lully's suspicion that, they're having an affair. But before they can unpack this any further, Diego spots Lully and calls her over. Right away, she tries to get inside Diego's mind, but for some reason, she can't read what he's thinking. Even more bizarre is that Diego is treating Lully as if they didn't break up. He tells her how happy he is they're together and how excited he is for their one-year anniversary. Very strange indeed. But all's revealed a moment later when Paula calls Lully into her office and explains that Diego has minor amnesia and can't remember anything from the previous day, including the breakup with Lully. So Lully decides to see the upside in it. And it's news that only gets better when she takes the opportunity to read Paula's mind and finds out that Paula sees Diego as a son and nothing more. Finally, Lully's starting to see the positives to her powers, that being an extreme invasion of privacy. Lully eagerly tells all this to Vanessa, and as excited as Vanessa is about it, truly she is, she has a small request for Lully. Seeing as Lully can read minds and all, she wants her to find out if one of the other doctors, Ricardo, has a crush on her. And not the other doctor, Elena. But this is where Lully draws the line. If she's going to invade other people's privacy and read their minds, it'll be for her gain only and not her friends. That's morally ethical. But now that Lully's coming to accept her powers, she realizes that in her line of work, they might actually come in handy. Like, to save lives. What follows is your classic montage scene of Lully and the other doctors examining patients in a bid to try and find out what's wrong with them. It's tricky though, because the patients have a nasty habit of lying to their doctors, or at least they try to. Where they lie openly to everyone else, Lully promptly reads their minds to find out what's really going on. She then uses that power to crack the diagnosis and prove to everyone else that she is the smartest, most capable doctor of them all. And even better, Paul is so impressed and makes sure to point out the real reason that Lully was able to succeed where no one else was able to. I hope you're all on board with this theme by now because the movie's really hammering it home. Anyway, despite her success, Lully's still feeling guilty and overwhelmed with this whole mind-reading thing. She's complaining to Vanessa, who has an idea. Naturally, that means taking Lully to a Romanian gypsy palm reader. Unsurprisingly, Lully doesn't take this too seriously, and eventually she gets so fed up that she just reveals her power to the gypsy, who freaks the hell out. The gypsy then confesses that this whole palm reading thing is a scam to make money. But if she works with Lully, they can become rich together. Lully and her friends promptly flee the gypsy's house. Now that night, the team decide to head out and celebrate a hard day's work. For Vanessa, this means hitting on her crush Ricardo. Too bad for her, Elena's already talking to him. And it takes Vanessa straight up butting into their conversation for Elena to take herself elsewhere. And now, finally, Vanessa has Ricardo all to... no wait. Julio suddenly pops up and says hello. Well, that frustrates Vanessa more, who just wants some alone time with Ricardo. Little does she realize, though, that Ricardo's clearly vibing Julio. And Julio is very much vibing him. So much so that when Julio offers to grab him drinks, Ricardo insists that he help. I don't know, guys, but I'm thinking this Vanessa-Ricardo love story just ain't gonna happen. Maybe Vanessa's starting to feel it too, because she soon finds herself outside talking to the one person she doesn't want to, Elena. And Elena doesn't think too much of Vanessa either. At least they're being honest. This honestly continues when Elena reveals that Vanessa won't have to worry about her much longer, because she's being forced to move to Portugal with her parents. And then, in a very strange yet selfless act, Vanessa offers Elena a place to stay at her apartment. Vanessa's experiencing some character growth. But over here we have Lully still struggling on that aspect of her life. Despite the fact that she and Diego seem to be doing really well, like never before, she can't get past the fact that she's still lying to him about the two of them still being together. And even worse, Diego has completely come around from his no longer wanting to be a doctor. Now, that's all he wants. And what's better is that he wants to do it with Lully by his side. Now she's really starting to question whether or not she should tell him the truth. But she goes ahead and puts that concern aside for the night so the two of them can have some hot steamy sex. All this seems to have really hit the spot for Lully, and by the time morning rolls around, she's even more in love with Diego than ever. A shame that it can't last, as Diego's father soon arrives home and catches the two in bed together. But that's just the beginning. They all sit down for breakfast, and soon Diego and his father are in a heated conversation about what Diego should be doing with his life. And that conversation turns to an argument pretty quick, because Diego wants to be a doctor at a public hospital, but his dad wants him to go into private practice. So they're fighting and cursing, and Diego's father walks off in anger. Now the next day, Vanessa all but demands that Lully read Ricardo's mind already and find out if he's really into her. She finally gives in and agrees. And a little later on, the three of them gather around to scan Julio's leg to see if he's really injured. As they do this, Ricardo carries on and on and on about Julio. Like, yeah, he can't stop talking about the guy. And so on. Vanessa watches Ricardo with infatuation. But when Lully reads his mind, well, she doesn't reveal what she finds out. But I think everyone with eyes and ears knows who Ricardo's really crushing on. And it ain't Vanessa. Before Lully can reveal this, Diego rushes in and tells Lully that their patient, Oscar, is getting worse. And it looks like he might not make it. All Oscar wants before he dies is to see his son. But he knows his son won't come. But he has to. And it's even more so when it's revealed that surgery might save Oscar, but Oscar won't agree to it, at least not without his son. Diego and Lully thus go and pay the son a visit. Now, the son's skeptical about visiting his father, claiming that as an alcoholic, his father never loved him and spent his entire childhood ignoring him and drowning his life in a bottle. But then Diego steps in. He reveals that his relationship with his father is pretty much the same. And he goes on to explain that his father always chose work over him and never showed that he cared. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't love him. In fact, Diego knows that his father loves him, even if he doesn't show it. Just like Oscar loves his son. It is really a nice speech, a touching moment, and it has the desired effect. The son decides to visit Oscar. He gives his okay for the surgery, and it ends up working and saving Oscar's life. Later that night, the team all go together to watch Julio play volleyball. He's really worried about starting in the game, but his leg was given the okay, and wouldn't you know it, he plays the game of his life. We see him block ball after ball after ball, ultimately helping set up the team for victory. His friends are cheering, Ricardo included, and they couldn't look happier. After the game, Vanessa asks Lully what she found out about Ricardo, and she asks that while Ricardo and Julio are clearly flirting 10 meters away from them. Yo, for real, girl, look over there, they flirting hard. It becomes so obvious that Lully doesn't even have to say anything, and finally, Vanessa realizes that she's barking up the wrong tree all this time. At least she's happy for him. But the good times can't last forever. The next day, Lully and Diego are checking in on Oscar when Diego suddenly gets his memory back, which means that he remembers that he and Lully are broken up, and she's been lying to him. Naturally, he's not too happy about that. His antipathy only lasts a moment though, because the next thing we know, Diego's collapsing on the floor. Diego! They call for a medic and rush him to the ER. And in a moment of clarity, Lully actually listens to Diego. Or rather, she remembers what he told her before, back when she couldn't read minds. She remembers Diego complaining of a sore leg after his travels. And then she remembers him complaining of shortness of breath. She promptly tells Paula that it's most likely an embolism starting in his leg, and she explains why this is. And Paula's only too happy to listen. And thank God too that Lully finally started to listen somewhere, otherwise things wouldn't have been good for Diego. But it doesn't end there. As Diego's getting prepped for surgery, Lully's holding hands and looks over him in worry. Diego's then shocked with the defibrillator, an action which sends a pulse through that body right into Lully. And she flies backwards, landing on her butt. But she's fine, and in a moment she's too worried about Diego to think on what the repercussions of this might be. But I feel like we already know the answer to that, don't we? The surgery ends up going perfectly fine. Diego is alright. Even better, his cold and isolating father rushes to the ER when he heard what happened to his son. Diego's pretty surprised that he came, but his father tells him that of course he came. He's his son, and he loves him. And wouldn't you know it, facing a life and death situation was just what Diego needed to shore up his love for Lully too. Paula tells Diego that it's thanks to Lully that they were able to save him, and Diego can't help but forgive her for everything. They share a bedside kiss, and we just get the sense that everything's gonna be okay. And indeed, we cut to 2 years later, where we see Diego, Lully, and everyone else has graduated. The two are still together and madly in love, and Diego followed his passion, became a surgeon, where Lully has decided to go into something a little different. Her experiences with mind reading had made her realize how much she enjoys working with and helping people, and as a result, she became a personal physician.